My best friend has been distant and barely communicating with me since we shared an intimate moment. I used to think that Parker and I had the kind of friendship that nothing could ever shake. We were the classic best friends, inseparable since middle school, finish each other's sentences close. Our bond was forged through late-night movie marathons, epic road trips, and hours spent lying on the grass, sharing dreams too big for our small town. That's why, when it happened, it felt so natural. It was one of those nights when the air was heavy with secrets and possibilities. We'd been at a party together, a rare thing for us, and left early, laughing at how out of place we felt. Back at my place, we ended up on the couch, the night's quiet stretching between us. I can't even remember how it started, maybe it was the wine, maybe the way his eyes softened as he looked at me, but before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't awkward like I might have expected, nor was it wild or dramatic. It was gentle. Familiar. And when he stayed the night, it felt more intimate than anything I'd ever experienced, not because of what we did but because of who he was. My best friend. My Parker. But the next morning, something had shifted. He was quiet, distracted, and when he left, I thought I must have imagined the tightness in his smile. "I'll text you," he said. I waited, convinced he'd call later, to laugh with me about how unexpected and strange it all was. Except he didn't. And now, a week later, my phone sits silent on my nightstand, mocking me. Every notification sends my heart racing, but it's never him. I've started second-guessing everything. Did I push too far? Did he regret it? Or worse, did I just ruin the most important relationship I've ever had? Days turned into a week, and then another. Parker's absence was deafening. Our usual rhythm, daily texts, memes sent without context, the unspoken understanding that he was just a call away, was shattered. I tried reaching out. A simple, "Hey, wanna grab coffee?" got a curt, "Can't, busy," in response. Another text went unanswered entirely. I wanted to give him space, but the silence was gnawing at me. He wasn't just avoiding conversation, he was avoiding me. He skipped our usual Friday trivia night at the bar. When I bumped into him outside the library, he acted like he was in a rush, barely meeting my eyes before muttering something about a deadline and walking off. Panic set in. Had I crossed a line? Parker and I had always been transparent with each other, but now, it felt like there was a wall between us, one I didn't know how to climb. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was the way I couldn't predict him anymore. Before, I'd always known what he was thinking before he said it. Now, his silence was a locked box, and I was afraid to open it. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through our old messages, searching for answers. There it was, months of friendship distilled into text bubbles, inside jokes, and moments of support that had felt unshakable. I lingered on one message he'd sent after my breakup with Ian last year: "No matter what happens, you've got me. Always." I wanted to believe that still held true, but the space between us told a different story. Finally, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. If I'd lost him, I at least needed to know why. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do with Parker. I called him and left a voicemail. "Parker, it's me. Look, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I've done something wrong. If I have, I need to know so I can fix it. Please, just call me back. I miss my best friend." I hung up, feeling raw, exposed, and more terrified than I'd ever been. Would he call me back? Or was this the beginning of the end for us? Days turned into a week, and then another. Parker's absence was deafening. Our usual rhythm, daily texts, memes sent without context, the unspoken understanding that he was just a call away, was shattered. I tried reaching out. A simple, "Hey, wanna grab coffee?" got a curt, "Can't, busy," in response. Another text went unanswered entirely. I wanted to give him space, but the silence was gnawing at me. He wasn't just avoiding conversation, he was avoiding me. He skipped our usual Friday trivia night at the bar. When I bumped into him outside the library, he acted like he was in a rush, barely meeting my eyes before muttering something about a deadline and walking off. Panic set in. Had I crossed a line? Parker and I had always been transparent with each other, but now, it felt like there was a wall between us, one I didn't know how to climb. It wasn't just the physical distance, it was the way I couldn't predict him anymore. Before, I'd always known what he was thinking before he said it. Now, his silence was a locked box, and I was afraid to open it. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through our old messages, searching for answers. There it was, months of friendship distilled into text bubbles, inside jokes, and moments of support that had felt unshakable. I lingered on one message he'd sent after my breakup with Ian last year: "No matter what happens, you've got me. Always." I wanted to believe that still held true, but the space between us told a different story. Finally, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. If I'd lost him, I at least needed to know why. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do with Parker. I called him and left a voicemail. "Parker, it's me. Look, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I've done something wrong. If I have, I need to know so I can fix it. Please, just call me back. I miss my best friend." I hung up, feeling raw, exposed, and more terrified than I'd ever been. Would he call me back? Or was this the beginning of the end for us? The voicemail hung in the air, like an unspoken confession. I stared at my phone for hours that night, willing it to light up with his name. But it didn't. By morning, the weight in my chest felt heavier, and the questions in my head had turned into a roar. I found myself replaying every moment from that night, scrutinizing it for answers. Had I misread the signals? Parker had leaned in first, hadn't he? Or had I crossed some invisible line, taking something he hadn't meant to give? I hated how much I was second-guessing myself, hated that I felt like a stranger in my own memories. The worst part wasn't even the silence, it was the not knowing. Parker and I had always had a shorthand, an understanding. Now, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was actively trying to erase me from his life. I didn't know how to fight that. That evening, I did something desperate. I showed up at his apartment. He wasn't expecting me, clearly. His expression, a mix of surprise and dread, cut me to the core. He hesitated at the door, like he was deciding whether to let me in or slam it in my face. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was pounding. Hey," he muttered, stepping aside to let me in. His place was the same as ever, messy bookshelves, the faint smell of coffee and laundry detergent, but it felt colder somehow. Like I didn't belong there anymore. We sat down, me on the couch, him perched on the edge of a chair. The silence stretched, and I realized this was the first time I'd been alone with him since that night. I could feel the words building up inside me, but they stuck in my throat. "I miss you, Parker," I blurted finally. "I feel like I've lost you, and I don't understand why." He looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of his mug. "You haven't lost me," he said quietly. But his voice lacked conviction. "Then what is this?" I asked, gesturing at the distance between us. "You're avoiding me, shutting me out." Did I ruin everything by? "No," he interrupted, sharply enough to make me flinch. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "No, it's not you. It's me." I laughed bitterly. "Really? You're going with the breakup cliché? It's not a breakup, okay? We're not even." He stopped himself and shook his head. "This is exactly what I didn't want to happen." "What do you mean?" My voice cracked, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. "You didn't want this to happen? Us? Or?" "I didn't want to lose you," he said, finally meeting my eyes. There was a sadness there that I hadn't seen before. "You're my best friend, and that night, it was amazing, but it scared the hell out of me. I don't want to screw this up." I blinked, struggling to process his words. "You think you'll screw it up?" "I know I will," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You don't get it, do you? You're the one thing in my life that I can always count on. If this," he gestured between us, the unspoken truth hanging in the air, "goes wrong, I lose everything. I lose you." My throat tightened. "So instead of trying, you've decided to push me away?" He looked away again, and I could see the conflict warring within him. Part of me wanted to reach out, to tell him we could figure it out together. But another part, the part that had been sitting in silence for weeks, was angry. Hurt. "Parker, you're not just hurting me. You're hurting us. Do you even see that?" He winced, like my words had physically struck him. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I don't know how to fix this." For a moment, I didn't either. The person sitting across from me was my best friend, the boy who'd been my rock for years. But now, he felt like a stranger, one who was just as scared of losing me as I was of losing him. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. "Maybe we should both figure out what we want," I said softly. "Because right now, I don't think either of us knows." His eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. "Wait, don't leave like this." "I'm not leaving," I said, though it felt like a lie. I need time. And maybe you do, too." I walked out of his apartment that night feeling like I'd left a piece of myself behind. The air felt heavier, and the world seemed quieter without Parker at my side. But I couldn't keep chasing someone who was too scared to be caught. The days after our conversation felt like walking through a fog. I went through the motions, work, errands, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, but everything reminded me of Parker. The cafe where we'd always order the same thing and argue over who would pay. The park bench where we'd once spent hours planning a cross-country road trip we never actually took. Even the music in my headphones felt like it was mocking me with lyrics about heartbreak and loss. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. I couldn't decide if I was angrier at him or myself. Parker's admission, that he was afraid of ruining us, was both infuriating and heartbreaking. How could he not see that his pulling away was doing exactly that? But then there was the other part, the quiet voice that whispered, "Maybe you were the one who pushed too far. Maybe he's right to be scared." One night, desperate for clarity, I confided in my older sister, Emma. She listened patiently, as she always did, her expression unreadable as I spilled the entire story from start to finish. "So, let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "He's terrified of losing you, so he's ghosting you?" "Pretty much," I said, sinking deeper into the couch cushions. "It doesn't make sense, does it?" "No, it makes total sense," she replied. "But it's also a load of crap." Her bluntness caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, he's scared, sure. But that's not an excuse to treat you like this. You're not just his safety net, you're a person with feelings. And if he can't handle those feelings, maybe he doesn't deserve you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so consumed by guilt and confusion that I hadn't stopped to consider what I deserved. All I could think about was what Parker might be going through, what I could do to fix things. But Emma was right. Friendship, love, wasn't supposed to be this one-sided. That night, I decided to stop waiting for Parker to make the first move. If we were going to salvage anything, I needed to lay it all on the line, even if it meant risking what little we had left. The next day, I sent him a text, "We need to talk. In person." He replied quickly, which surprised me, "Okay. When?" We agreed to meet at the park near his apartment, the one where we used to go to clear our heads. As I walked there, my heart felt like it was in my throat. I didn't know what I was going to say, only that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting on the swings with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked up as I approached, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." I sat on the swing next to him, the chain creaking under my weight. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. "I'm sorry," he said finally, breaking the silence. "For everything." For avoiding you, for being a coward. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. Why, Parker? Why did you pull away like that? He sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. Because I didn't know how to deal with what I was feeling. That night, it changed everything for me. I've always loved you, but I didn't realize how much until then. And it scared the hell out of me. My heart skipped a beat. You love me? Of course I do, he said, his voice raw. You're my best friend. You're everything. And that's the problem. If I mess this up, I don't just lose a relationship, I lose you. And I can't. I can't risk that. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. For so long, I'd been terrified of losing him, but I hadn't stopped to consider that he might feel the same way. Parker, I said carefully, you don't lose me by trying. You lose me by giving up. His eyes met mine, and I could see the struggle written all over his face. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I don't know how to be what you need. Then we figure it out together, I said. But you have to let me in. You can't just shut me out whenever it gets hard. That's not how this works. He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. Okay, he said finally. I'll try. I don't know if I'll be any good at it, but I'll try. It wasn't a resolution, not entirely. But it was a start. The first few weeks after that conversation were like walking a tightrope. Parker and I were trying to find our footing in this strange, uncharted territory. There was no clear definition of what we were to each other now, not just friends, not quite a couple. It was an in-between space, full of vulnerability and quiet hope. At first, things were tentative. Parker started texting me again, little things like memes or random thoughts, as if testing the waters. He asked me to coffee one afternoon, and we sat in the corner booth of our favorite cafe like old times, except the unspoken weight of everything lingered between us. I caught him watching me more than once, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to figure out what came next. It wasn't easy, though. Every time we got close, whether it was a brush of his hand against mine or a conversation that felt too deep, he would pull back, like he was afraid of crossing an invisible line. And every time he did, it stung. I tried not to take it personally, reminding myself that this wasn't just my journey, it was his, too. But I couldn't deny that the dynamic had shifted. Parker wasn't just my best friend anymore. He was someone I was beginning to see in a new light, with all the messy, complicated emotions that came with it. And that terrified me as much as it terrified him. One night, after a particularly awkward dinner at his place, I decided I couldn't keep living in limbo. Parker, I said as we stood in his kitchen, dishes still piled in the sink, we need to talk. He tensed, gripping the edge of the counter. That sounds ominous. It's not, I said quickly. I need to know where we stand. What this is. He nodded but didn't look at me. I've been wondering the same thing. Okay, so let's figure it out, I said, my voice trembling. Because I can't keep doing this halfway thing. It's too hard. I need to know if we're going somewhere, or if we're just pretending everything is fine. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want to try. With you. But I don't want to lose what we have if it doesn't work. His words hit me like a wave, equal parts relief and fear. Then we have to promise each other something, I said. If this doesn't work, we don't let it destroy us. We find a way to stay in each other's lives. He looked at me then, his expression raw and open in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. I don't know if that's possible, he admitted. But I'll try. I'll do whatever it takes. I nodded, feeling the sting of tears behind my eyes. Me too. It wasn't a grand, cinematic declaration of love. There were no fireworks, no sweeping gestures. Just two people standing in a messy kitchen, holding on to each other and the fragile hope that they could make this work. Over the next few months, we navigated the murky waters of becoming something more. There were good days, long walks in the park, late-night conversations that felt like peeling back layers we hadn't even known were there. And there were bad days, moments when his fear got the better of him, or when I felt the weight of my own insecurities creeping in. But we kept trying. And slowly, the space between us began to shrink. One night, as we sat on his couch watching a movie, he reached for my hand without hesitation. It was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental. I caught his eye, and he gave me this shy, crooked smile, like he couldn't quite believe this was real. And in that moment, I wondered, do you think I was right to wait for him? Would you have been this patient with someone you care about, or would you have needed clarity sooner? And what about our promise to stay friends if this doesn't work out? Does that seem realistic to you? Or are we just setting ourselves up for heartbreak? I can't decide if we're brave for trying or foolish for risking it all. What do you think? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.